So now I have the pleasure of introducing our keynote, Fred, who I've never met before, but I've read all about him. You can watch his videos online about forgiveness. He's the director of the Stanford Forgiveness Project. And think about that for a second. He's been able to create an entire career about forgiveness. Just how amazing is that? Thank you, Fred, for donating your time this morning. And the mic is yours. You might need to raise it.
You know, when you think that somebody could build a career around something like forgiveness, it talks about what an awful world we have. Right? I mean, because people can be horrendous to each other. I mean, think about that. It's been very sobering for me to work with forgiveness over the last 20 years. It's so needed and so hard to do. And people, all of us, we get so lost in our, I'm going to say, our small view of the world that centers around ourselves, that it's been almost shocking to me to see people defend almost indefensible cruelty, to see husbands and wives just be vicious to each other. You know, to see parents not talking to their kids, to see kids not talking to their parents, to see dogs not talking to their cats, you know what I mean? The ways that people antagonize and alienate and sink into a kind of a self-absorbed oblivion is really challenging. You know, we all know, the state of our politics now, and it's like two different groups of babies, you know, going off into the corner, folding their arms and giving each other the finger. There's no adults. I mean, not no, but the emotional maturity to say either that I was harmed and at some point I better get over it before I die, or people are bound to disagree. I don't have to hate people who don't see the world the way I do. These are such simple things. You know, one of the things that was really interesting to me, having taught this for so long and traveled around, not quite all around the world, but to large parts of it, was to watch the politics, in particular the United States, of having people in other countries tell me about the politics. But what I have seen more than almost anything, at least politically, is intolerance. What I remember very clearly when Bill Clinton was fooling around with Monica Lewinsky and then he was being impeached, there was even then no communication between the two sides. The right thought he was like Attila the Hun, pulling down, women's clothing, and the left made excuses for him like you can't believe. It has continued like that. Living here, every time there's a Republican president, all of my friends think the sky is falling. When I traveled to North Dakota, the sky fell when Obama was president. Same invective, same closed heart, same hostility, just different object. Same hostility. And so forgiveness looks at how do you get rid of the heart that's hostile. It's not as concerned with the object. Most of us are addicted to our stories about the object So we lose the capacity to quiet our own hearts. And that's what forgiveness is about. It's a very interesting thing, because having tried to teach this for a long time in pretty awful places and in the midst of nothing. Like, I've tried to teach this to people whose like neighbors built a fence, you know, 1/4 of an inch onto their property. And they're apoplectic. Like, Fred, you wouldn't believe it. This much. Are you kidding me? You don't even own the property anyway. You're just a tenant. We're all gonna die. Who are you kidding? 1/4 of an inch onto a rental property, which is all we ever have here. Like, as I get older, and I remember the last time I spoke here, it was just funny because being a senior seems so far away, and now it's not so far away. I'm just letting you know how weird that is. You know? It's like, how can people really be that old? Now I know. And it reminds me, I'll never forget this. This was just like creepy. The first time that I gave a talk at Stanford to the Parents' Weekend, which political correctness has now changed to Family Weekend because not everybody has parents or something. I don't know. There's a lot of people being hatched, so people in Stanford can't refer to them as parents anymore. But in a desire to make sure nobody ever feels bad about anything, they now call it Family Weekend, which is fine. But when it started, it was Parents' Weekend. And I've been giving a talk almost for that long there on the emotional status of Stanford students, or something along that line. But I remember the first talk I gave, I think my son was maybe 6 or 7, and I'm looking at these people with like college students and thinking, it's impossible. Like, it just doesn't move like that. And the last talk I gave, I think my son was 25. Right? I mean, it's just, so, but here's the point of that. In a life that moves like that, what do we think we're holding on to when we hold on to contempt and criticism and negativity and hostility? Who is it that we think is doing this holding on that's going to be able to reflect upon all the ways that the world hasn't done what we wanted when we're dead? Or too old to do anything about it? How isn't, and this is a question that I have, how is it that the human being's staggering denial of mortality doesn't like have more breaks in the mortality avoidance? And let each of us ask ourselves, literally, we know where we're going, we just don't know when. Human beings have been around for, 5,000 to 10,000 years. Every single one of them is dead. So what is it that I am fantasizing? What hatred, what negativity, what grudge across time? What am I hallucinating that I'm actually able to hold on to this thing? But it's an interesting thing when all of us like are co-conspirators in this ridiculous fantasy. Yet we're anything more than like motel guests here. Some of us in Motel 6, some of us like in the Hilton, but we're in different motels, but that's it. We're just temporary. We don't matter that much here, except to ourself. And when we tighten around that self to have our grudges, I believe we matter even less. But the fantasies, and being a baby boomer, I think the fantasy was taken to rare heights with baby boomers, because the silliness of it, of yeah, 70's the new 50. I mean, I remember the first person who tried to tell me that 60 is the new 40, and I would go and I would look at 40-year-olds and then I would look at 60-year-olds, and you'd think, like, do all of these people just have such bad vision that that's how they think 60 is the new 40, because they literally can't see anything? Because, I mean, you go into a room of 40-year-olds, it's drastically different than going into a room of 60-year-olds or even 50-year-olds. Like, nature's not confused by our narcissism. Right? It just keeps on going. And I know we're all terrified of the meaninglessness of it and the shortness of it. And the only thing that I have seen in terms of aging is people who don't carry these wounds and grudges forward, they age better. They just do. You know, you get to a certain age, and I don't know when that age is, but probably somewhere in your early 50s, when you become absolutely certain that the world will go on without you. You know, back when you're 25, you can't really conceptualize 70 years later, maybe, or 60 years later, where there will be no interest in anything about your story because you'll have been gone. But somewhere around 50, you start getting that sneaky suspicion that, wait, in 2046, I may not be here, you know, like, and it starts to creep into the denial. And it starts to bust the silly stories we tell ourselves about how essential we are to the functioning of this world. It does, you can feel it. I mean, everybody has that experience. I wonder if that isn't one of the hearts of what the midlife crisis is. I don't know, but it's real and it's deep. But how it doesn't get in deep enough for us to stop hating things and stop being so harsh and stop walking around as if our negativity is our contribution to this world. Like, we really think that our hostile opinions define us. I had a fascinating experience with this for myself a decade ago. I was giving a talk in another very liberal area, like the San Francisco Bay Area. It's about as liberal as you get. I think in Stanford zip code, you get arrested if you're a Republican. And I joked about it. I mean, I'm a Democrat. I mean, I'm just joking about it. But if the Democratic Party at Stanford zip code like ran Attila the Hun, and the Republicans ran Mahatma Gandhi, I think it would be a very close election. But I was speaking in another one of these, like, small-minded, in that way, enclaves with very little intellectual diversity. And it was somewhere in the Southwest. And it was right before Barack Obama became president. And so I'm talking, and a lot of the ways I try to remind people to be more forgiving is through politics. Like, to open our hearts enough so that we can allow the world to have the differences of opinion and the experiences that we don't like. Because that is part and parcel of being a human being. It's never going to be different. It has never been different. This world was not created for us to get everything we want. That's just an eternal kind of truth. So I was speaking in front of a group, and it was right before Barack Obama was elected, and I was talking about this was when George Bush was president. And I said something along the lines about, well, where I live you know, George Bush is maligned, and people tell everybody he's not smart enough, and all this stuff. And I say regularly in my world, people slander the president. I mean, I'm not. And all I said was this, and then I said that, you know, I happen to think, this is just 10 years ago, my political opinion, I said I happen to think the Iraq War was a disgrace. That in my political opinion, we invaded them. Flat out, we invaded them with manufactured reasons. This is my political opinion. I said, though, but if I saw, like George Bush, or I was invited to the White House, or, you know, Donald Rumsfeld came up, or Karl Rove, I'd be respectful to these people. They were duly elected, and I respect the government and the structure, and I was raised to respect them. I can disagree 100% and not lose my own goodness. And I said this, and I said, you know, their conduct in office is their character. My conduct in relating to them is my character. I'm responsible for my character, not their character. So if I'm not respectful, that only speaks to me, doesn't speak to them. And this is just me talking, right? So about an hour later, during a break, a woman comes up to me and is like, she's almost stalking. Not quite stalking, but she's really weird. No, that's the only way I can put it. Like, I'm done. I want to go home. I'm not going home, but I want to take a break. And she comes up and starts walking after me, and I'm walking around, and she's following me. And every now and then, you just get weird people when you talk. And the weird people always come up last. I'm just letting you know. It's true, if you're like sane and normal, you walk up, you say hi. If you're weird, you wait till everybody's done. You know, because you have something to say that you don't want anybody to hear, or you know, you're afraid to talk about your conspiracy theories, whatever it is. So she's one of these weird ones, and I'm taking a break, but she's like marching after me, and I can't get away from her. So after a few minutes, I give up and say, okay, hi, what can I do for you? Which is not really what I want to say, but, and then she says, well, I want to thank you for your talk on politics. And I said, okay, great, now go. And she said, well, no, I really want to thank you. I really appreciated what you said about respecting people you disagree with and not getting too, like, angry at points of view that are not the same as yours. I said, great, now go. And she says, well, I said, so great, now why does that matter to you so much? She said, I'm Donald Rumsfeld's daughter. And my kids have had to leave their elementary school because parents gave them grief in this liberal school for what their grandfather was doing with the war. And so it got turned around on me, and I recognized hate speech. And I'm interested not just in the speech, but the condition of mind that allows us to demonize, and we feel good about demonizing people who either we don't agree with or do things that we don't approve of. We create an enemy here. And then an enemy can only be attacked, which is basically how this world functions. We attack our enemies. First we create our enemies, and then we try to destroy them, starting here. And I remember thinking, wow, that's just, because all of these, I'm sure, nice liberal parents felt that they were trying to keep the world safe for their version of democracy, as many of us do. You know, it's very interesting. I had a conversation recently, I'm going to say 6 months ago. I was giving a talk in, I think it was right outside of Walt Disney World, I mean, Orlando, I guess, in this huge hotel. They had a conference of insurance something or other, and there were thousands of people, and I'm in the hallway, and I bump into somebody, and he's got a Salina, Kansas is where he's from. So we start to talk, and I have like Stanford, California sitting on my shoulder, but he knew where I was because I could talk. And we just talked for a few minutes, and then we recognized that on politics, we disagreed on everything. Literally everything. And it was a very interesting moment because we both could see the tendency to just make the other person wrong. But then I took a breath, and he took a breath. And this is what he told me, and then this is what I told him. He said that 15 years ago, he was a Republican lobbyist in Washington for the insurance industry. And now all of his friends are like big shots because they stayed as lobbyists, and one of his friends is like the second in command for Mitch McConnell, the Senate Majority Leader. And all he hears from his friends is what a toxic environment it is in Washington. That from their side, nobody will listen, it's antagonism, and nothing can get done because of the other side. And that's all I hear from my side. And I ask myself now, like, not just how did we get there, but how do we practice getting away from there? I think remembering you're mortal is a big first step. I think that's a huge first step because it leads to some degree of humility. That the world existed way before us, that it will continue to exist. If you read any of history, you see the same issues coming over and over and over. The names change, but the agendas are exactly the same. And it's very nice to read history because you recognize that basically hatred and violence lead to more hatred and violence. That's one. Two is to have a little bit of humility about your own behavior. Like, how tolerant are you? And how do you handle things when they don't go your way? Are you kind? Are you generous spirit? Are you filled with compassion? Well, if we're not, where does it start? You know, I know these talks are like straight out of the 60s, but it starts here. Third, because we have a modest amount of time here, we need to appreciate this unbelievable privilege we have of being alive. And that is different than throwing our hostile opinions around all over the place, including our hostile opinions about our spouse and our mother and our kids and our neighbors and all the other ways that we throw our hostile opinions around. This is an unbelievable short opportunity to experience something staggeringly both beautiful and incomprehensible. Just being alive here. Because we forget we're mortal, we forget that we have to do things to appreciate this in our brief time here. And that should be where more of our attention goes. Just that the sun rises. You know, that we have children. That those of us who live here are so staggeringly lucky that it is almost incomprehensible. We have running water and food and shelter and education and clothing without literally almost having to do anything. You just show up to work somewhere and they give you like green things, you know? It's like our hostility and our righteousness They're low levels of evolution. Appreciation is a higher level of evolution because hostility and criticism, they're simply manifestations of fear. And it would be better to work directly on our fear than it would be to just allow ourselves to continue to be so hostile and frustrated. And the first pathway in to work on our fear is one, to acknowledge that fear is legitimate in a mortal temporary body. Of course you're scared. Of course, because you know you're going to kick the bucket at some point. You just don't want to have somebody else or something else choose the time and place. But that fear is unavoidable and inescapable. You just have to be careful that you don't project it all over the place. But it's an absolutely legitimate fear. And there's nothing we can do to ameliorate that. If there was something that we could do to ameliorate that, then Silicon Valley would be a happy place, and it's not. But we have all the material things that we need. We have all the adventures. People fly all over the place. People make money. They get power. Doesn't make them happy. If we could work on that fear simply through manipulating the external or by materiality, then we would have already done that in this area. And we haven't. So all you have to do is, spend 5 minutes on 101 or 5 minutes in Whole Foods, and you'll know this is not a pleasant, relaxed, hey, cut in front of me if you want. Because that's what a content person does. What, you're in a hurry? Great. My life is good. Go. You're the one who obviously is troubled, but not me. I remember one time between classes at Stanford, standing at the express lane at the Whole Foods right here in Los Altos, so in a hurry, because the El Camino, for whatever reason, was so backed up. I was driven from Stanford to the Whole Foods. El Camino was so backed up, it took me 45 minutes to get from Stanford to at 5 o'clock in the afternoon. I had a class again at 7. I'm thinking to myself, the class may end before I get back. And so I'm standing there online on the express line at the Los Altos Whole Foods, counting the number of items the person ahead of me has. Because if they have 11, I'm going to boot them off that line. And I'm probably going back to give a class on forgiveness. That is a miserable state of consciousness, which we all share. That state of consciousness does not forgive anything. That's the issue. That's the state of consciousness that causes all the problems. Selfish hurry and worry, based on fear. The deep fear of mortality is legitimate, because we all are going to get sick and die. There's no loopholes in that one. So that's legitimate. The only avenue out that we have is to make not peace with that, but to recognize that at our core, we're anxious. And stop blaming it on all the things outside of us that we think are making us anxious. We're anxious. And the world is, for us, about as good as it gets. And yet we're still anxious. The evolutionary biologists refer to human beings as descended from anxious apes. Because the chill apes, they're toast. You know what I mean? Like any ape that shared its, bananas or something, here, take my bananas. They didn't reproduce. So we descended from the prickliest, guardedest, tensest apes. And that's us. But you gotta recognize it. And there's no other reason why people need 15-room homes except fear and a sense of inner discomfort. Happy people want to give. Unhappy people want to take. Because you take to soothe the unhappiness. If you're happy, you're generous. What do you care? You're happy. So what we're looking at is a foundational anxiety that we project outward all the time, and some of it's legitimate, but in that projection we lose what the other piece of this reality is this is just an unbelievably beautiful opportunity for something that we will never understand. And it's designed to be temporary, and it's designed to be somewhat dangerous and vulnerable. And that's just like, that's the given of the game, like in Monopoly, when you pass go, you get $200. It's the same thing, it's the game, given it to it. So we have a choice to some degree to either be driven by our fear and anxiety, and therefore making everything out there that makes us fearful into an enemy, including people that haven't done what you wanted. You make them into an enemy too. Or we can address the basic underlying anxiety that we're all struggling with and recognize it and own it. And then you can make choices a little bit more to see, wow, what a gift. If that monkey did share a banana with me, that banana's a good thing. And what an amazing thing it is to have children. And we can't keep them totally safe, no matter what we do. Never. Because nothing's ever totally safe here. So we have a choice between fighting all the things that frighten us, or all the things in the past that have harmed us. We can keep on fighting them. And we can try to demonize them. You know, we can refer to our sister-in-law for the next 25 years as the SOB who didn't do what we wanted. Or we can let it go. And try to be in the present as best we can with what's left of our short life. But that's the choice we have. I mean, it's too binary, but that's a large amount of the choice we have. We can be with our life, with everybody's life, has, you know, lots of stuff. I'm going to finish with my favorite, actually the best thing I've ever read on forgiveness. It's along these lines. It's the poem A Settlement by Mary Oliver. And, you know, I've been teaching for 20 years, and I've written lots, and these 3 paragraphs are better than anything that I've ever written. But it's encapsulating what I tried to say. Look, it's spring, and last year's loose dust has turned into this soft willingness. The windflowers have come up trembling. Slowly the brackens are uplifting their curvaceous and pale bodies. The thrushes have come home none less than filled with mystery, sorrow, happiness, music, ambition. And I am walking out into all of this with nowhere to go and no task undertaken, but to turn the pages of this beautiful world over and over and over in the world of my mind. Therefore, dark past, I'm about to do it. I'm about to forgive you for everything. Thank you.